Hello, folks, and welcome to Author Adjacent, a show about the journey from hobbyist writer to professional author. I'm your host, Michael Vadney, and today I once again am sitting with Adam Fernandez, author of the Midnight Wars series, which debuted with Vermilion Flames. And welcome to the show, Adam. I'm glad to have you back.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So last time we had you on here, we were mostly talking about Vermilion Flames. It was your debut novel for the Midnight Wars series. And since then, you've been pretty busy. You had a lot of the work done for the sequel called Ashen Dawn. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep.
Excellent. And you also have another book that's related to the series coming out. What can you tell us a little bit about what you've been up to since we've last talked, really?
Yeah, so at the beginning of last year, I released Vermilion Flames, which was my debut novel and the start of the Midnight War universe, as I like to think of it. Ashen Dawn was the second book, came out about October of last year. Picks up right where Vermilion Flames leaves off, so it's a straight continuation of the story. And then while I was finishing up that project, I had another idea for sort of like a companion series to go with the main one, which starts with the first book, Iceborne, which releases now next Friday. Actually, it's available for pre-order now. But I'm really excited about that. The new project, I think Iceborne especially turned out really great. It's set in the Midnight War universe, sort of a little further along the timeline. So it's set right after Ashen Dawn. But the way the story is framed, a lot of it is also a bit of a prequel too. So you get you get a little bit of both worlds. You get a lot of new context, which I think is great if you're a fan of the series already, and if you aren't, it's an excellent entry point. That's kind of how I intended it to work.
So now you have two different entries into your series. You mentioned that your newest, this little standalone that takes place technically after Ashen Dawn, has all of these prequel episodes to it. Is it like a bunch of flashbacks that are before Vermilion Flame that kind of culminate into the events that are happening in the latest books?
Yes and no, not directly. So technically, it's what you would call a frame story. So both the start and the end of the story are in the current timeline,
Mm-hmm.
but the middle section is back in the past. So you learn the character's sort of origin story through through the narrative of the current timeline. The main character, Arabella in Iceborne, is a character that you meet in Ashen Dawn briefly, that you don't really learn too much about, but you can kind of tell early on that she is special in different ways. And it was just kind of when I was writing Ashen Dawn, I got really inspired by her character, and I was like, I think she has more of a story to tell, and that was what inspired Iceborne, and I just kind of ran with it. So so there's characters there that are going to be familiar to people. There's going to be events that are referenced that are familiar to people, but then there's also going to be a lot of new hints too that um, hint at events for book three that you haven't seen yet.
Ooh.
So no major spoilers or anything, but you do get a little breadcrumbs that I think are fun. So I think people will enjoy it.
I like it when you're reading through a series or even just a single book where you get the pieces of the things early in the story and then later it's revealed what the knowledge all pertains to and you're like that's why this happened in chapter 2 or book 1. That's
Exactly.
always really fun.
And
No.
there's some of those I hid in there too that maybe aren't immediately obvious, but if
Mhm.
someone's really looking for them, I think they'll find them.
Nice.
I just
I'll keep a lookout.
yeah, I like doing that kind of thing. As a reader, I love that stuff, so I tried to include some of that too in my own stories.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember in our first interview, you said you like to be your ideal customer is yourself, like the things you want to
Right.
see in books. But I'm really looking forward to picking up on all these little nuggets of story because I just pre-ordered Iceborne last night, and the audiobook for Ashen Dawn, did that drop just last night?
Just last night, yeah, it's
Oh yeah, I
fresh,
got a
real
copy of
fresh.
that. Thank you. I really appreciate it. I'm
Yeah.
really looking forward to digging into that. Um, so it sounds like you're pretty dedicated to the Midnight Wars as a series, then.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think from the beginning, I always envisioned it to be kind of an overarching universe, right?
Hmm.
And then from there, being especially the scale of it, there's so many possible stories in there to tell, and
Yeah.
I have no shortage of ideas. I think I have less time than I have ideas. So,
That's a good
I'm just
problem to
trying.
have.
Yeah, it's a good problem. So I'm just trying to pick the best ones and running with them. And the main like sort of Midnight War series will be a 4 book series.
Hmm.
So there's 2 more that I plan on doing for that to sort of close out the main point of view storylines that we have now. And then Iceborne also will likely be sort of a shorter trilogy. So Iceborne is a little bit shorter than my other books because it's specifically focused on one character. Likely a 3 book series is kind of what I'm thinking.
So you're going to be having two series that are kind of going on in parallel at the same time.
Yeah, basically. So, not to give any spoilers really, but
Don't you dare.
the scale of the conflict, right, is large enough where I think it will support 2 sort of independent storylines happening at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's one of the advantages of doing either like an epic global, or in this case, the space opera multi global
Yeah,
conflict, is you have a lot of room for stories, the little ones and the big ones.
yeah, exactly.
So, at what point when you were writing your debut novel, Vermilion Flame, at what point did you really figure out, okay, this is going to be a series as opposed to a standalone, or did you know that from the first sentence?
Yeah, I mean, right from the very beginning, I knew. Just knowing myself as a person and like the
Hmm.
types of books that I like to read, I knew there was almost no way that it wasn't going to be a series.
Yeah.
Um, just because I can't help myself, I want to just keep telling stories, right? And I want to make them as big as possible. Funny enough, with Iceborne, I actually went into it thinking, oh yeah, this is definitely just going to be one book. It's not going to be anything else. Just
Yeah.
one simple standalone. And then essentially, like all the people that read it up to this point are like, "Wow, this is really good. Like, this should really be like. I hope there's a sequel. Like, there's going to be a sequel to this, right?"
Ooh.
And I'm like, "Yeah, I mean, there could be." And then I started thinking about it, and I'm like, "All right, well, I guess there should be." And now it's turned into there's going to be, um,
Yeah.
and that's just sort of where I'm at now. But I'm excited by it. I mean, it's fun and.
So when you finished Iceborne, when you finished writing it, you had no intention of making it into another sequel or another series?
Not really, no. I mean, in the back of my head, I was like, oh, maybe it could be, but I was really happy with how it ended. It felt, very buttoned up. Like it works totally as a standalone story.
Hmm.
Um, but then, there definitely were places it could still go. Because originally, what I was thinking was that I would finish Iceborne, and then from there, the plot would sort of wrap back into the main series.
Yeah.
And then, sort of, the more I thought about that, I was like, it's actually better if I leave them separate. I think.
Okay. That actually leads really well into one of the questions that I had ready is, how does reader feedback really affect your ongoing series? So you wrote Vermilion Flames, it went out into the world, you got reviews, people were putting out onto the internet what they thought about it, what they liked and what they didn't like. How did that affect going into Ash and Dawn?
I think for me, I'm not going to pretend I don't read all the reviews. I definitely read all the reviews. And you take it in, right? You sit with it for a little bit. You think about
Mhm.
it. You make sure that like I try to take it. I take it all like well, right? I'm not bad with constructive criticism, so I'm happy to
That's
receive it.
good.
It's great. I mean, that's how we all get better, right? And I certainly have a lot to learn. I try not to have any sort of like knee jerk reactions to it either, right? Because sometimes like the thing that the reader didn't like or maybe had a question about was something I purposely tried to do, whether right
Mhm.
or wrong, right? Like maybe that was the reaction I was going for.
Yeah.
So that I mean that's part of it, right? And you have to kind of weigh out all that. But then also sometimes things don't land the way that maybe you expected them to. So then that's good to know too, because maybe you could be a little bit more effective in how you're portraying certain things
Mhm.
into the next book. But and a lot of it was just sort of good, honest feedback that really didn't require me to like it was just things that you naturally learn by the process, like from going through it.
Yeah.
Because getting to the second book, like even just through the process of editing and finishing the first one, I had learned so much. And my storytelling had improved immensely from when I wrote the first chapter to when I wrote the last. That, the second book was already, leagues better than the first, just right from the get go. Um,
Yeah, just from experience.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
Um, And I mean, I think that's just part of it, right? You grow naturally along the way, and I think you see that with every author, really. Like, I mean, with very limited exceptions, you could go like,
Yeah.
especially authors that are in genre fiction that have written series. You read book one versus like book 10, and you'll notice a tremendous difference.
Oh
Uh,
yeah. I
you know,
remember finishing Vermilion Flames and I was like, this is really solid. It was a very good debut. And I'm like, if he starts here, he's only gonna get better. So I'm very excited to hear that you feel that way too.
yeah,
It's gonna be a pretty awesome series. I'm
I,
really looking forward to it.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I'm
Of
I'm
course.
certainly going to make it the best I can. That's for sure. And I
Yeah.
want people to enjoy it. It's ultimately meant to be a it's a bit dark, it's a bit dystopian, but it's
Mhm.
ultimately meant to be a hopeful series. That's the type of writing that I like, that I enjoy.
Mhm.
I want there to be sort of that little bit of hope in there that people can strive for, and that's all wrapped up in there.
I like that. There's oh god, there's so much to respond to with what you said. So going back to earlier part of that answer, where you're talking about sometimes people just kind of bounce off the book, and I think a lot of that is just taste. Some people are not going to like the same things that you like to write. I was talking to Adrian M. Gibson with Mushroom Blues about this, and he was talking about how he made his main character Henrietta very polarizing, so that you knew from the very beginning whether or not this book was going to be for you, because she's a really horrible person and she's supposed to be in the beginning. And I think you're going to have that with a lot of different books where sometimes the choices that the author makes or the writer makes isn't just something that jives with you, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, what you're saying after that is the unexpected ways your story is received. Is there any one of those that really like stood out to you where you're like, oh, that's awesome, but I really wasn't expecting you to go that way with it?
There's two things, especially with Vermilion Flames, that came up, I think, a lot, and not
Hmm.
necessarily positives or negatives, but just the way the book was received, and sort of surprised me because it wasn't what I intended. So,
Yeah.
in particular, the way I structured the beginning of the story with Kaya as the lead, and it starts with sort of a coming of age story arc in the like kind of early chapters, and we don't really get to Silas's involvement until a little bit later in the story. And
Hmm.
I think a lot of people sort of got the impression that it was meant to be some sort of like kind of young adult novel, which it isn't. But
It is
that
not.
was it is not in any way. But um, you know that maybe either my inexperience or just my like overcommitment to the timeline. Because a
Hmm.
lot of why I did it like that was because that was just in the timeline how things worked out.
Yeah.
So I rolled with it, and in retrospect, yeah, maybe I would have changed it. But I mean, it still works. It's certainly not a problem. It's just it's a taste thing, right? Not everybody loves those chapters, but but they stick with it, and then they're happy in the end. So that's all that
Yeah.
matters. But
I think that's one of those things you learn over time as you get better. Like I'm still definitely learning about it, is how to establish the promises very early in your book about what is this book about.
yeah,
And it can be difficult to accidentally mislead, or it can be difficult to not accidentally mislead the reader when you're not quite used to that yet. Like
for
I'm
sure.
still doing my first book. I'm still trying to figure that out, but I can definitely see how that could be a problem for a lot of people with their first one.
Yeah, I mean, well, that actually was ended up being why I added the prologue with Silas in it, and sort of the kind of typical like military sci-fi type of opening, to kind of like tell people, hey, just stick with it through these early
Yeah.
chapters. This is still what the book is about, but um, but yeah, I mean, it's like you said, and then I think we've talked about this before too. Is people need to like trust you as the author too, right? And if
Yeah.
like you know uh, let's say like now, right, they go and they read my new book Iceborne, right, and they say, wow, this is like really great, and like they like where it goes and everything jives well,
Hmm.
and then they go and read Vermilion Flames, they're gonna be like, okay, this is maybe not what I expected, but he's gonna get there, so I'm gonna trust the process, and then they
Exactly.
they won't have any questions. But if it's the first thing they've ever read from you, and they don't know you from anybody else, then yeah, I mean, it's, you can't really fight that, unfortunately. But
No, I think that summed it up perfectly, really. And with every book that you write, you add more weight onto the scale of, I know what I'm doing. Trust me, it's going to be okay.
right, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Um,
So, with moving from Vermilion Flame to Ashen Dawn and then now Iceborne, what is there like a particular lesson that you learned in publishing your debut that really helped in publishing the other two?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think just for me, it was just the process of writing to editing to drafting, like sort of the next thing, and like just trying to be
Hmm.
efficient with all of that. Obviously lining up sort of all the team members too is like a logistical challenge.
Yeah.
Because you're trying to consider, your editor, the timeline for your editors. Like for me, at least, I outsource a lot of the actual production, like in terms of the typography and like the book design and all that. So, I have to account for sort of all that time in there too when I'm trying to figure out release dates and stuff. But I think the one benefit, though, to kind of having the first couple projects done is that it's made me much more patient with the later ones. Where
Yeah.
in the beginning I was like really anxious to kind of get it out in the world when, you know, it would have been better if I maybe had more time with it. But at the same time, there comes a point, I think, in the beginning where you really you don't know what you don't know, and you
Hmm.
get to a point where like you've made it the best you can with the experience you have at that point. So to me, it just made more sense to have it out in the world, get the feedback, you know just figure out like, hey, do people just generally like this or not, am I on the right track?
Yeah.
um, and so like that was really useful. So I try not to let like perfect get in the way of the good, and um, just focus on doing the best I can with, I mean, this isn't my full time job, so I have to be mindful of that too. Um, you
Yeah,
know,
that's true for a lot of self-published people.
right. And I do the best I can, try to create the best possible, highest quality possible product that I can manage.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, you were saying that your process has become a little more streamlined since your first
Yeah,
book. Is there anything particular that changed in your process, or was it just you got more efficient at what you were already doing?
I think I just got more efficient at what I was already doing.
Yeah.
And I had like sort of a like, I have all my spreadsheets in place now, right? I've created a lot more sort of comprehensive timelines. I even created this sort of big, like convoluted, like kind of graph. I don't even know really what to call it. It's sort of like an infographic of the state of the solar system. So I have like
Oh, that's
all the
cool.
different like planets laid out, and who's controlling what and what's happening where, and it's made like drafting a whole lot easier because I'm not constantly going back and forth trying to remember things. Because you'll
I
be
think that would be a
surprised.
really cool thing to turn into a poster.
Could be. Well, I need an artist first to make it like pretty. Right
Yes.
now it's functional, but need somebody to make it like cool.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean that's the biggest thing. You know what? I was surprised. I think by how much I forgot about what I wrote in the first book by the time I was finishing up the second one. Because the
Did you
characters
have to
are important.
reread Vermilion Flames when you started Ashen Dawn?
I did actually. I listened to the audiobook to refresh
Nice.
my memory a little bit. But yeah, because you got to get back. Because I think also what happens is you forget like what happens where exactly in which book.
Hmm.
So like now I'm drafting book three, and I have to remind myself, oh, like did that happen in Ashen Dawn, or did that happen in Vermilion Flames, or like you know what was like that guy's like rank again? Like I don't really
Yeah.
remember, and then it's trying to keep track of all that stuff. But it's fun. I mean, it's part of the gig, I guess.
And that's what the giant infographic is for helping you with?
That's right. Yeah, yeah. I believe in my spreadsheets. That's it's key to my success.
As I've gotten older, I've gotten more and more organized, and spreadsheets are where it's at, people. Like, I know I bag on pantsers sometimes, and there are a lot of them, and they do very well for themselves, and I'm happy for every single one of them. I cannot do it. I need to have things written down. I can't keep it all in here at once. It's absolutely impossible.
Listen, there's a combo, right? Like, I mean, my outline, I list all the chapters, right? I list all the point of
Hmm.
views for each chapter, basic start, end date,
Hmm.
that kind of thing. And then it's just, it's like two or three sentences. They
Yeah.
just say like whatever, the main point of that chapter is. And then I kind of go with it from there. I don't, I know some people have like really, really thorough outlines, but that's not really my thing. I just need something to kind of go back to and go, oh, okay, oh yeah, that's what I had in mind. Right. That's the next plot point. Okay, cool. And then,
Yeah, I think it's called signposting. That's the
is that
kind
what
that
they
I like
call
to
it? I
do
don't
as
know.
well. I
Yeah.
think that's what it's called. That's
Okay.
what I read somewhere. That's what it's called. So that's what I call it.
That's cool. I'm going with that
Who knows?
signposting. I believe you.
I'm spreading the word.
All right.
So you brought up re-listening to Vermilion Flame on audiobook, and we just got Ash and Dawn last night. Did Eden come back to narrate it for the second one as well?
He sure did. Yeah. Eden's back. And, he's still, thankfully really excited by the project. And, he's committed to sticking with it, basically as long as I keep writing them.
That's awesome.
Um, so I'm really excited about that. I mean, yeah, he's fantastic. I can't say enough good things about him. He's a pleasure to work with and so immensely talented at what he does. He really brings
Forgive me if I butcher his name, but it's Eden Gabe?
Gabai.
Gabai.
Yeah,
Yeah, he's very talented. I
yeah,
really liked him in the first book.
yeah. And I think he's, I mean, he only continues to get better. I mean, his range is awesome. He has so much diversity in all of his different, where like accents and dialects and things, and
Yeah.
you know,
And that's perfect for fantasy and sci-fi in general.
For sure, yeah, and it was such a big thing that I wanted to out of the story. I really wanted people from different places in the solar system to like feel different.
They
Uh,
should, because like even on a single planet, we
right?
sound so different.
Bingo.
People should sound different on different planets.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
So that was a big thing I was going for, and his having so many diverse accents at his disposal really makes that come alive.
So from moving on from Vermilion Flame to Ashen Dawn and then Iceborne, what would you say is the greatest challenge that you faced moving past the debut? Was it just remembering everything that happened beforehand, or was there something else that really made it difficult to keep moving forward?
Um, no, I mean, I think for me, it never really felt particularly difficult. I guess, like, because I finished
Mm,
Vermilion Flames, and I think actually by the time like it was ready for release, it was almost the opposite. I was like hyper focused and excited on getting to the next one.
yeah.
So like, I think most of that drafting for book two like really happened like right in the beginning. And then, as I got deeper into it, and, Ash and Dawn is a much longer book.
Mhm.
Well, not much longer, but it is longer than Vermilion Flames. So, once I got deeper and deeper into it, I was like, oh man, then I started questioning everything. I'm like, am I even any good at this? Like,
Oh,
does this book,
the self doubt starts creeping
yeah, the
in.
self doubt, when you start like running into like some, plot problems that you're trying to work through. And, um, but that all came later. It wasn't really like in the immediate beginning. In the beginning, it was all excitement. The vibes were
Oh yeah.
high, and then
The-
then the hard work sets in, and then you start to kind of lose it a little bit. But
yeah.
then you get back there eventually.
It's that lull in the middle that gets you.
yeah, and it's not well because like I mean I actually started drafting Ash and Dawn. Before Vermilion Flames even like released. So that was February of last year, and it took me, I mean, I know like it's still fairly fast, but still didn't get it out until October when I had originally
Mhm.
planned on doing it far sooner, but it just, doesn't always work out like that sometimes.
Yeah, I've been very impressed with the speed of your writing. So last time that we talked, you had Vermilion Flame that was out. Ash and Dawn, I think, was just about to go to your editor or was about
Yeah,
to come back from your editor. But you
something
still
like
had like a good chunk of it done already.
yeah.
And I think Iceborne may have just been a thought in your head. I hadn't heard about it at that point.
No, it was new. Yeah, that one came together surprisingly fast, and but I think I lend that more to just the story just really clicked with me. There's aspects of it that uh, although like not directly related to my life, were just very personal, like themes that were very personal to me.
Yeah.
So I just found it just really easy to write.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest adages that people say is write what you know.
Yeah,
So if there is something that clicks with you, something that really is kind of like close to your heart, it definitely makes sense that it would be easier to get the words to flow out.
yeah, and also it's a little bit of a shorter project too. That one came in at about it's about half the length of Vermilion Flames, so it's not
Yeah.
a it's not a particularly super long novel. I mean, it's solid novel length, but not a heavy lift.
Do you think writing this shorter novel that is not directly related to the Midnight Wars kind of helped rejuvenate you to go into the third book?
I think so. Yeah. I think it put me in a good place for the third book. I felt kind of a little bit refreshed. It was almost like I got a little bit of a break from it to like
Yeah,
kind of rethink about things. And it actually ended up giving me a lot of ideas for the third one too.
good.
Um, so yeah, I mean, overall, it was. I think it all just really worked out super well. I think.
Well, that kind of makes sense too, especially since they run in parallel. Uh,
Yeah.
Midnight Wars is going to affect this smaller trilogy a lot, and maybe the trilogy will affect Midnight Wars. It almost sounds kind of like we're going to be going into either like a Sanderson or Marvel kind of situation where we're not going to directly talk about or deal with the things that are happening in the other series, but they're going to affect what we're doing and vice versa.
I think that's going to be something along those lines. We've talked about. I personally haven't really read any Sanderson besides his the Wheel of Time books that he did,
Yeah.
but from what I understand, yeah, it sounds like it's going to be something along those lines. For me, it was Raymond D. Feist, which I've talked to you about before, the magician book.
Yeah. Yeah. I still need to check them out.
Yeah, like he's really more my inspiration in that field where he's written a ton of books
Mhm.
in that universe, but they all kind of follow different characters and different timelines. But then there's some sort of overarching you know characters that are sort of always omnipresent,
Yeah.
and I think that's always in some way what I've imagined for this.
I think the first like really interconnected universe that I had been exposed to via books was probably Forgotten Realms, the Legend of Driss series, like huge amount of books between. Sorry, are you familiar with this series at
I
all
am,
by
yeah. I haven't
R.A.
I haven't read
Salvatore?
it, but as a D&D nerd, I have a good idea of.
I would suggest it, especially the ones by R.A. Salvatore. Big fan. I still have a copy of the Spear Wielder's Tale, like right over there. It's not part of that series, but it was like the first book I ever got exposed to him on, and I read it like 6 times while I was in high school, working as like a car mechanic in like summer jobs. So it's all covered in oil and everything. But the Forgotten Realms series that he has written mostly follows a single character and the group around him called the Companions of the Hall. And they would be affected by the other Forgotten Realms authors, the other people writing for D&D. Something would happen in a different part of the world, and then he would have to adjust his books to it. I remember like one of the biggest ones being into D&D, you might know about this, is like the spell plague and that whole time in the history of Faerun or
Yeah.
Faerun Forgotten Realms. I think I'm getting this right.
No, you're
Who
good. Yeah,
knows?
we got.
We'll we can do a D&D episode at some point.
We should. Yeah, I think so.
We'll figure it out. But back to talking about the Midnight Wars and moving on from your debut to the sequels and everything that follows after that. What has life been like since moving on with your debut and submitting, I think, just your first one, 4 projects and 4 competitions, like the self-publishing science fiction competition?
Well, as you know, I'm exceptionally famous now, so that's been a little hard on me. But no, but realistically, I mean, really, honestly, not much.
Paparazzi, I can see him flashing out the window right
Yeah,
there.
they're everywhere out there. It's getting crazy. But no, I mean, uh, it's been interesting. I mean, the self-published science fiction contest is probably the one that has gone the best for me so far. I am still technically in the running
Which
as
is
a
excellent.
quarterfinalist, so like that's pretty cool.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Definitely like way more than I ever expected. And I think in the beginning too, I was super interested in a lot of these contests, and sort of I was essentially all the different contests because you want to get a sense of get some validation, right? Like
Yeah,
how
some recognition.
right, yeah.
You
Well,
worked hard.
yeah. I see. For me, I don't even think it was the recognition. I just wanted to know, like, do people like this, right?
Oh yeah.
And to get some sense of like I don't know, just what did people think? Like, will they keep reading these if I keep writing them? That kind of thing. And
Hmm.
so that's been really cool. And at this point, I think going forward, I don't know that I would probably try to enter the book in as many as I did this original go around. Um,
Hmm.
but I think it's still sort of part of the journey, I guess, to do these things. So
What made you come to that decision? Like, what is the deterrent to continuing to submit to new competitions that come up? Is it just
Um,
time?
so some of them, some of them have entry fees, which is part of
Mm,
it, right? And essentially, what you get out of it is, you know, you may get some kind of review or not or whatever. So there's a financial component to it, which um,
valid.
you know, kind of is what it is. And then from there, I mean, that's kind of it, I guess. Really, honestly, it's just sort of like, and the at least in the indie space, not all contests necessarily have a lot of you don't get a lot of exposure out of them per se. Like, I
Hmm.
think contests, at least this is just my personal opinion, in a lot of ways are largely for the authors themselves as opposed to for readers. I think readers are much less interested in the outcome of contests
Yeah.
unless they're ones that just you know provide a lot of visibility to books. So like if you win like a Hugo Award or something, right? Like you get a lot of
People
notoriety.
know that name. They know
Correct.
that competition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you name a dozen other competitions, most people will have never heard of either the competition or the book that won it. Um,
That's valid.
and
But then you also get to add the this is my award winning book. And
there,
that's really what authors are going for.
I think so. Yeah. I guess personally, I struggle with that. Like, I don't.
Hmm.
There's something fundamentally about it that makes me a little uncomfortable, and I don't know if
Hmm.
that's just my own self consciousness or something, but um, it just it's hard for me to like want to put that on my books. I mean, obviously you got to win stuff first, but still, it just um, I don't know, not necessarily my first thought, I guess.
No, I get that. Like there's a aspect to being self-publishing that really it's just all the marketing, the putting yourself out there and kind of just trying to talk up yourself and talk up what is essentially your product to get people to read it, to get people to buy it so that you can continue to do it. And ideally, for most people, the dream is to eventually get to a point where you can support yourself doing that.
Yeah,
But in order to do that, you do have to put yourself out there. And it is uncomfortable sometimes and
for
it can
sure,
feel kind of cringe sometimes.
100%.
Uh,
Um,
yeah, but it feels like a part that is unfortunately necessary for certain things, but you can get away with not doing it. It's just it's
well,
harder in a different way.
and I agree. But I think like where I've sort of felt the most, like gotten the most benefit out of that kind of thing is in doing things like this, right? Like making connections with other
Mhm.
authors and other content creators, and really like interacting with the community directly. I've had just way better success just really going out there, talking to people, getting to know them, just chit chatting with them, and that I think, at least for me personally, has done way more than you know, sort of I don't know, I guess like typical things like the
Yeah.
contests and you know advertising and that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Plus it's more fun because it's fun to talk shop. It's fun to
Yeah,
talk books. Like, and we don't always have people in our lives that are as excited or are as knowledgeable as we are. I think a lot of people are very isolated. So you can dive into the book community, into the indie author community, and just kind of vibe around and just be like, hey guys, I'm one of you. Let's hang out.
absolutely, I agree 100%.
Yeah. But that's one of the advantages of going traditional publishing is you get to offload a lot of that to a team of marketers and people who have been doing this for a long time professionally. And you can more just write the book and put it out there. But there's a lot of
Although
gatekeeping you have to go with that.
Well, and although from what I understand now too, unless you're already a big name,
Hmm.
the publishers aren't really doing most of that for you. They expect authors
Uh,
nowadays to you know bear a lot of the heavy lifting in that department. So
Oh, I
um,
have heard that. That's true. I hope it's not as bad as like the internet makes it seem because then it's like, what's the point? If you're not getting a benefit, like why go through all that?
for me personally, the reason I never chose to was I kind of went through looking at all the math and thought to myself, if I go through the querying process right, it might be 3 years before my book ever sees the light of day, even if I get
Yeah.
a deal. And, let's say I get an advance, right? And that advance is even a six-figure advance, say it's $100,000, right? If I start dividing that over 3 years of effort, all the time writing the book and everything else, you know, although it'd be like wonderful, right?
Yeah.
It's not necessarily life changing. Like, it'd be comparable to working, another job. So
Which you
then it's kind of,
essentially are.
which you essentially are already.
Yeah.
So then to me, it was like, well, you know what? If I go the self-published route, right, I can release it now. It could be out for the next 3 years. And if it happens to resonate with readers and I do a good enough job, um, you know, I'll reap all the benefits of that, of my hard work,
Yeah.
right? And I won't have to give away, you know, 70% of or more of my earnings
Minimum, yeah.
to my publisher and my agent and everybody else. And thankfully I was in a position where, I have a day job and it could support my writing, which is certainly a privilege that I have. But for me, it just made more sense to do it that way. Um, and if
Yeah.
one day I get to the point where, they want to throw a big contract at me and I could just write full time, that'd be awesome too. But, um, you know, to me, it just made more sense to do it this route up front. And, because this was ultimately a hobby first. And then, if it becomes more of a business later, then that's great. But, for now, I just
Yeah.
really wanted to tell the stories I wanted to tell and share it with, excited readers and, talk to people like you about it and like just enjoy this whole process, because it's a lot of fun. Um,
Yeah. That's a really good attitude to have about it. And that is also a good point. One of the things that I was thinking about while you were saying that was one of the barriers for a lot of people to do self publishing is the upfront cost and expense.
yeah,
Um, and that's why a lot of people do go traditional. That, and I think there's a little bit of like the recognition that we were talking about earlier, the validation
absolutely.
um,
And it's
with
definitely not
going
a,
traditional.
Yeah, and it's definitely not a one size fits all thing, right? Like, I mean, I think everybody's situation is different. Everybody wants something different out of this,
Yeah.
and you just kind of have to make the choice for you. Um, but that's why I just never even really, I never tried, I never explored the trad route because it just didn't make any sense for me. It wasn't what I needed right now. So,
Yeah, well, that makes sense. But it sounds like you have a really good attitude about it. You just want to write the stories and get them out there.
yeah,
Like, yes, the dream is to be able to do this full time, to quit your day job. Most of us don't go to our jobs because that is what we dreamed of doing as children.
sure.
But enjoying the process, enjoying the journey is something I've really fallen in love with when it comes to writing. And I think a lot of writers do have that really good attitude about that. And I love that about the community. It's one of the wholesome parts about it that I really enjoy.
I think that's largely because you have to, right? I mean, like you've seen, working on your own book.
Yeah.
Is that it's a lot of work, and if you're not passionate about it and you're not really like committed to it, like you just aren't going to do it,
Yeah.
because it's not easy. You gotta really love it, especially when there's no like pot of gold on the other side. uh,
Yeah.
like
That
you
was
gotta
something
want
you were saying earlier about patience and going through the first one. I have to reteach myself that all the time, especially like I'm on my fifth draft now. I'm handing it off to the editor after I finish this one. But every time I go back to it, I'm like, I gotta go faster. I gotta get done with it so I can do the next one. But then I'm gonna like slow down, man. It's gonna be okay.
But you know what? There is some of that too, though. I think because I think it's really easy to get too caught up, also, where you're like, okay, I'm
Yeah.
obsessing over this one sentence for weeks, and it's like, okay, that's when like the project manager in me comes out, and I'm like, we got to kind of move this along here.
Yeah.
We got to find a solution and keep it moving, so we can get to the finish line at some
Yeah.
reasonable time
It's
frame.
really a balance.
Yeah,
Just trying to figure out what works for you and what pace is good for you.
for sure.
But with your debut out and everything and all these other books in the Midnight War series coming out, do you go to conferences at all? Have you tried that yet?
I've
Or
tried.
you go
Yeah,
ahead.
I've done like two, well, not conferences, but I've done like two in person, like book fair type of events. Um,
I think that counts.
yeah,
How were they?
I mean, they were cool. I think. I mean, I would say like at least these particular ones weren't like super large, right? And I think in general, sci-fi wasn't you know very represented. There weren't necessarily a lot of sci-fi readers at
Yeah.
like these particular events because they were just generic sort of community events.
Yeah, like
Uh,
local stuff.
like local stuff, yeah. So I mean, you got a really mixed bag, and you just it was whoever kind of showed up. Um, but I was able to sell some books. People will pick up the first book at least, either because they feel bad for you or like they are really interested in whatever the story is you have to tell. But either way, whether or not they actually read it and follow up later, it's impossible to know, right? Because you don't get any metrics from that. So
Yeah.
um,
You never know though. Like maybe someday those pity sales will turn into return
it
customers.
sure
You
can.
never know where your audience is going to come from.
But you know what? I think what the real benefit, at least for me personally, was going to those
What's up?
events to be able to better talk about my books
Hmm.
in like, especially in a quick format. And I'm still not great at that. And trying to summarize Vermilion Flames like in a couple of sentences is extremely difficult for me,
Yeah.
um, because I don't think I've figured out the magic formula yet for really distilling sort of the storyline into just a couple of words. But
Yep.
that's where I found like the most use out of it. And I don't know, that'd be my advice to any other starting authors too. Try to figure out how to distill your book into a couple of sentences as soon as possible. It's a really
Yeah.
useful skill.
Practice writing a blurb will definitely do that. Help condense your story down to like the very basics of what it's about. And
For sure.
that's hard. Like
It's very
it's
hard.
way sometimes I feel like it's harder than writing the actual book and it's just like why are a few paragraphs so tough?
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely, I agree. I mean, it, one of the hardest parts, I think, of the whole process for sure. Um, it would be an experience. I think it'd be kind of cool, and just maybe it'd be better too to be in a space where like your target audience really is showing up. That
Yeah.
makes it a little easier too, because when you're talking to about your science fiction book to like someone who reads like murder mysteries, like contemporary murder mysteries, like
It's going to be hard to
it's
get
hard.
them, yeah.
And and I think there's an audience for almost everything. So it's just a
Definitely.
matter of finding them somewhere. But chances are,
Yeah.
like, well, so I brought up earlier the whole sort of young adult thing that some people got that impression, or so on. Um, I'm sure there were definitely readers too who read that and were locked in right away because they were like, "Oh, cool, I like this," And then
Yeah.
maybe they felt the opposite when it got sort of more gritty and dark in the second half. They're like, oh, I'm not. This is not really what I signed up for anymore. Who knows? I don't
Yeah.
know. You never know. And the truth is, a lot of times, you'll have a lot of readers who you'll never hear from, and you don't really even know what they think.
Yeah.
And you know, that's where you kind of like really hope that everybody leaves a review so you can just find out what people think.
Definitely. Yeah. If this ends up in the episode, you heard it, people. Write reviews so that we can know whether or not you hate or like what we do.
100%. It's a big help.
Yes, the feedback is tremendous. As you were saying earlier, like getting all that feedback on Iceborne let you know, like, oh, people want more of this. I'll give you more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you'll see soon. I mean, what's your timeline looking like these days?
Okay. So right now I'm moving
Right, you mentioned it.
and work is very busy. So I haven't had as much time as I've wanted to get on this. But the plan is I'm working with someone right now for cover art. I've gotten like a few different passes at it from her, and it's amazing. I'm very excited. Every time I get a pass from her, I'm just like, it's real. I wrote those people. Uh, but besides that, I'm on the fifth draft. I'm on chapter. I've gotten 14 chapters done in the fifth draft out of 50. Um, it's not as extensive every pass that I do on this one, uh, or not as like deep diving into each chapter when I'm going through this. I'm mostly going through adding some small things from beta reader feedback, uh, because I've already done the big pass of beta reader feedback. Now I'm kind of just tightening everything up and making sure it's really solid and then giving it to my editor after that. And then they're going to go through it, tear it apart, and hopefully put it back together in a way that's better. Um, and let me know like if I should take something out or put something in. What am I
Right.
missing?
That's good.
And then after that, it's off to the races. I'll probably be releasing shortly after that. I'm aiming for summer, but we'll
Cool.
see.
All right. And then when's the
But
audiobook?
I don't know. That's the thing. A lot of this stuff I'm still just figuring it out. Like
Sure.
I say summer, but I actually don't know if it's going to be summer because I don't know all the steps that I have to do. I'm learning them as I go, just as like you did and everyone else does. I guess a
But
question I do have for you then is since you're asking like when does the audiobook come out?
yeah, yeah.
When did you start looking? Like did you have the book done, completed, and then you looked for an audio?
No, I had it. I would say, like, if it were me, once I got it back from the first editor, because I
Mhm.
use two editors. I have my developmental editor, who she reads it and gives me, feedback on, plot and sort of big picture things.
Mhm.
And then once it comes back from her, usually I have a pretty good sense of like, okay, how much work is this really going to need to like, sort of clean up.
Yeah.
Thankfully, like my first drafts are relatively clean, so essentially I could go back through it one more like major time, and then I send it to the next editor who does the actual like copy edit, and that's
Mhm.
where everything's getting cleaned up with grammar and whatever punctuation and maybe weird sentence structure here and there. Um,
Yeah.
and then by that point already, like I'm already having a conversation with whoever's gonna do the audio because for one, their scheduling could be like really far out for whoever it is that you actually want to work with.
Yeah.
Um, and then on top of that, especially now with the first one, you're gonna have to go through all the auditions, right? And like do all that. And like that's just gonna take time. Um, so I mean, I would say like probably once you get it back from the editor and you have a good sense of like, okay, how much longer is this really going to take? You could probably
Mhm.
start throwing. I mean, honestly, you could do it right now. You could throw it up on there on ACX, put a little script, right? Because you're going to provide a script and then have them do auditions.
Mhm.
Um, and you can start working through it. I mean, and then you provide a timeline that you provide, right? And you tell them, look, I'm looking at recording this, around June or July or whenever, and you know,
And
because you don't.
did you just send them a copy of your book or did you send them like a formatted script?
So for the script, I just made like a. I mean, it wasn't really formatted per se. It was just like a couple of sections of. So since I had Kaya and Silas, right, I had like kind of one page of Kaya and like one page of Silas,
Okay.
and then just had them read it. And then like I could even. I mean, I still have all the recordings. I could send you some, give you an idea of what it was like if that's helpful for you. But
That's
um,
cool.
and
I
then
would very much be interested.
okay, yeah, I'll pull out some like just give you an idea of the different ones that I got. Yeah, so I just gave them that. They recorded it, submitted it, and then with ACX, the great thing is like you pay literally nothing up front at any point.
Mhm.
So you don't have to worry about any of that. You don't have to sign your contract until like you finally select someone. You have a lot of time. Like there's not like a rush per se.
Yeah.
As long as you're just upfront, I think with the people, like, hey, this is when I'll be available. Blah blah blah. What's your schedule looking like? Because a lot of them are just busy, also, and they're lining up
Yeah.
jobs for later in the year.
That's awesome. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm pretty excited for that. I'm excited to hear my characters.
yeah. I mean that process was really neat. I had a lot of fun with that.
Well, I think we're running low on time. Why don't you go ahead and tell the people one, where can they find you on the social medias and such, and where can they find your books, including your newest pre-order?
Yeah. Well, you can find me on all the social medias on at Adam Fernandez author. Um, Also on my website, adamfernandezbooks.com. All my books are listed on Amazon. They're available for purchase. My next book, Iceborne, which releases next Friday, is available for pre-order. And book 1 and 2 of the Midnight War series are available on Audible as well.
And I will definitely be listening to Eden talk through those books. I'm very excited for it.
I highly recommend the audiobooks. They turned out fantastic. So
Absolutely. All right, folks, that's going to be it for us today. Thank you for coming and hanging out with us. And until next time, let's be author adjacent together.